6 months after the Battle of Nexus Prime, the galaxy was a very different place. The comfortable assumptions that had governed interstellar politics for centuries lay in ruins, replaced by harsh realities that no one wanted to acknowledge but could no longer ignore. Captain Jiho stood in the council chambers of New Geneva Station, surrounded by representatives from dozens of species who had once considered him a dangerous barbarian. Now they were offering him command positions in something called the Reformed Galactic Defense Initiative, a military organization that had been hastily created when more Vorthak swarms appeared in 3 different systems. Captain Jiho said, "Counselor Veltar of the Zelthon Hegemony, your expertise in combating extinction-level threats is unprecedented. We would be honored if you would accept the position of Strategic Combat Coordinator." Jiho looked around the room at faces that showed a mixture of hope, fear, and barely concealed desperation. "Counselor, 6 months ago your government filed formal protests about human military actions. Now you want us to lead your armies?" The silence that followed was uncomfortable but honest. The Zelthons had spent decades building their reputation as peaceful mediators, but when real violence threatened their colonies, their elegant diplomatic solutions had proven worthless. Administrator Hyun Woo had become an unlikely political figure as he led the faction of Catharans advocating for closer ties with Earth. His speeches to the colonial parliament were causing major divisions in their society. "We cannot continue to pretend that our traditional allies are adequate for the threats we face," Hyun Woo argued to the assembled representatives. "The Cortani are still in meditation while 3 more worlds burn. The Nexari are still debating proper procedures while entire populations evacuate their homes." Elder Kojin rose to respond, his voice carrying the weight of centuries of Catharan tradition. "What you propose would fundamentally change our civilization. We would become like them. Violent, unpredictable, dangerous. We would become survivors," Hyunwoo replied. "The humans didn't save us because they are violent. They saved us because they were willing to be violent when violence was necessary." This debate was happening on hundreds of worlds throughout the galaxy, as species confronted the uncomfortable truth that their peaceful civilizations had been built on the assumption that someone else would handle the real problems. The Vorthak had appeared in the Corvani system 2 months after Nexus Prime, and this time there were no humans in the area to respond. The elegant Corvani defense fleet had been consumed in less than 6 hours, and 2 billion people had died before a hastily assembled human task force could arrive to clean up the survivors. Engineer So Min was working with human technicians to establish the first human-Catharan technical exchange when the news arrived about another Vorthak attack. This time it was the Althari system, home to one of the galaxy's most advanced scientific civilizations. "How many more worlds have to die before we admit the truth?" Somin asked her human counterpart, Chief Engineer Sungmin. "Our way of thinking, our entire approach to problems, it doesn't work against enemies that can't be reasoned with." Sungmin was carefully examining a piece of Catharan technology that used principles human science had never encountered. "Maybe that's not entirely bad," he said thoughtfully. "Your people create beautiful things, solve problems we never thought to tackle. But when something tries to kill you, you need people who know how to kill it back. So we need both approaches? Every human ship has weapons and laboratories. Every human colony has soldiers and artists. We learned long ago that survival requires everything: violence and compassion, destruction and creation, war and peace." This integration was exactly what terrified many galactic leaders. The idea that military capability and civilian culture could coexist seemed dangerous to beings who had spent centuries trying to eliminate conflict from their societies. Linguist Ari had established the first comprehensive human-alien cultural exchange program, working to bridge gaps between species that had never really understood each other. Her translation work was revealing fundamental differences in how various civilizations approached basic concepts like duty, sacrifice, and survival. "The word they use for warrior doesn't translate properly," Ari explained to a mixed group of human and alien researchers. "In most galactic languages, it means someone who has failed to find peaceful solutions. But in human languages, it means someone who protects others even at personal cost. These linguistic discoveries were forcing both sides to reconsider their assumptions. Humans were learning that their directness and willingness to use force genuinely frightened species that had evolved beyond such behavior. Aliens were discovering that human barbarism was actually a sophisticated moral code that prioritized protecting the innocent above personal safety. The reformed Galactic Defense Initiative was struggling with the practical challenges of integrating human military doctrine with alien technologies and mindsets. Human Admiral Dong Hyun found himself trying to explain concepts that seemed obvious to his species, but revolutionary to others. You cannot protect civilians by avoiding all actions that might harm enemies, Dong Hyun told the assembled fleet commanders during a strategy session. Sometimes the fastest way to save lives is to kill the things trying to take them. Zelthon, Admiral Morketh raised what he considered to be an important point. But if we adopt these aggressive tactics, how do we maintain our moral authority? How do we remain better than the enemies we fight? By choosing when to use violence and when to show mercy, replied Dong Hyun. By protecting those who cannot protect themselves. By being willing to sacrifice ourselves for principles that matter more than our own lives. These philosophical debates were taking place throughout the galaxy, as species grappled with the realization that their comfortable assumptions about civilization might need to change. The final test came when long-range sensors detected something that made every previous Vorthak encounter look small by comparison. A massive swarm, larger than any seen before, was approaching the galactic core from intergalactic space. Intelligence estimates suggested it contained millions of bioships and could threaten dozens of populated systems simultaneously. Fleet. Commander Taeyang, promoted after his survival of the Nexus battle, was assigned to coordinate the defense. But this time, he wouldn't be commanding just human forces. The new integrated defense fleet included ships and crews from 18 different species, all working together under tactical doctrines that combined the best elements from multiple civilizations. This is what we trained for, Taeyang announced to the assembled fleet as they prepared for humanity's largest military operation ever undertaken. Not just humans fighting alone, but all civilized beings working together to protect what matters most. The response came from dozens of species, translated into hundreds of languages, but carrying the same meaning: acknowledgement, determination, and hope. Engineer Somin watched the fleet deployment from her position aboard the new flagship, a joint construction that combined Catharan artistic design with human military functionality. The ship was beautiful and deadly, representing everything that both species could accomplish when they worked together instead of apart. "Do you think we can win?" she asked Security Chief Wu Jin, who had accepted a position as tactical advisor to the human command staff. Wu Jin studied the tactical displays showing the approaching enemy swarm. 6 months ago, I would have said no. But 6 months ago, I didn't understand what humans are capable of when they decide to protect something. The final battle was approaching, but this time it would be different. The galaxy had learned that survival sometimes required embracing the very qualities they had tried to eliminate from their civilization: violence and compassion, destruction and creation, the willingness to die for strangers, and the wisdom to know when such sacrifice was necessary. Humanity had been reluctantly accepted into galactic society, not as the monsters they were feared to be, but as the necessary guardians that peaceful civilizations needed but could never produce themselves. The Deathworlders had become the galaxy's protectors, and the universe would never be the same. As the combined fleet jumped toward their destiny, Captain Jiho looked out at the mixed crews serving on human ships and alien vessels alike. The barriers between species were breaking down, replaced by something stronger than fear or prejudice: the shared understanding that some things were worth fighting for, and that true civilization might require both the sword and the shield. The galaxy had finally learned that sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected sources, and sometimes the people you fear the most are the ones most willing to die for you. The news spread across the galaxy like wildfire. The peaceful Catharan colony had been saved not by their traditional allies, but by the humans. the same species that galactic civilization had deliberately excluded from their society. The implications were staggering and uncomfortable for everyone involved. Ambassador Inho arrived at the refugee camps established on Cathara Station 3 days after the battle. His job was to handle first contact protocols, but nothing in his diplomatic training had prepared him for this situation. How do you thank people who saved your species while your government was officially pretending they didn't exist? The refugee camps were unlike anything the Catharans had ever seen. Human medical teams worked alongside alien doctors, treating wounds with equipment that looked primitive but was remarkably effective. Human soldiers shared their rations with hungry children, despite having no obligation to feed people who weren't their responsibility. Ambassador greeted diplomat Nari as Inho entered the main coordination center. The human woman looked exhausted, having spent days organizing relief efforts for 3 million displaced aliens. We need to discuss long-term housing for your people. Inho was struck by the casual efficiency of her approach. No formal ceremonies, no lengthy negotiations about terms and conditions. She simply wanted to solve the problem as quickly as possible. The Galactic Council has authorized temporary housing on several worlds, Inho said carefully. But there are political complications regarding human involvement in the relocation process. Nari's expression hardened slightly. Political complications? Your people are homeless. Our people died saving them. What complications could be more important than that? This was the fundamental problem facing galactic leadership. The humans had acted when no one else would, but accepting their help meant acknowledging that the barbaric Deathworlders had shown more compassion and courage than the advanced civilizations that claimed moral superiority. Communications Officer Yunji had become an unofficial liaison between species during the evacuation. She found herself spending most of her time explaining human behavior to confused Catharans, who couldn't understand why their rescuers acted so differently from civilized beings. They share their food with our children, one refugee mother told Yunji. But they also carry weapons everywhere they go. Are they protecting us or threatening us? Both, Yunji replied, having learned to understand human thinking through observation. They carry weapons to protect us from threats. They share food because they believe it's the right thing to do. They see no contradiction between being warriors and being kind. This concept was difficult for most galactic species to grasp. Civilized beings had learned to separate violence from compassion, creating societies where conflict was handled by specialists while ordinary citizens lived peaceful lives. But humans integrated both aspects into their basic nature. The political ramifications were being felt throughout galactic space, as species that had ignored the Catharan distress call struggled to explain their inaction. The Zelthons claimed their fleet had been dealing with a higher priority crisis. The Cortani insisted their meditation season could not be interrupted for any reason. The Nexari maintained that their council procedures required proper deliberation before any military action. Admiral Donghyun found his fleet at the center of a diplomatic storm they had never intended to create. Every major government in the galaxy was demanding explanations for human actions, as if saving civilian lives required justification. Admiral, reported his communications officer, we're receiving formal protests from the Zelthon hegemony. They claim human intervention in the Nexus system represents an unauthorized military action that violates the quarantine agreement. Donghyun stared at the message in disbelief. They're complaining that we saved lives they couldn't be bothered to save themselves. This was exactly the kind of reaction that had led to humanity's exclusion from galactic society in the first place. Other species saw human directness and moral certainty as dangerous qualities that disrupted their careful political balances. Engineer Somin had become an unexpected advocate for human integration into galactic society. Her experiences during the evacuation had completely changed her understanding of what the Deathworlders represented. The Council must reconsider the quarantine, Somin argued at an emergency session of the Catharan government. These humans are not the monsters we were told to fear. They are people who risk their lives for strangers without asking for anything in return. Conservative members of the Council were uncomfortable with her proposal. They destroyed half The colony during the evacuation, argued Elder Kojin. Their methods are violent and chaotic. They solve problems by shooting at them. And it worked, Somin replied firmly. When talking failed, when negotiations failed, when our allies abandoned us, human violence saved 3 million lives. Maybe we need to reconsider whether our civilized methods are actually better. The debate revealed a fundamental split in galactic thinking. Peaceful species had spent centuries developing sophisticated methods for avoiding conflict, creating beautiful societies where war was almost unknown. But this pacifism had also made them helpless against genuine threats. The Vorthak were not interested in negotiations or cultural exchanges. They existed only to consume, and stopping them required the kind of decisive violence that most galactic species found morally troubling. Only humanity had retained the capability and willingness to fight extinction-level threats. Security Chief Wu Jin was analyzing battle reports when he made a disturbing discovery. The Vorthak swarm that attacked Nexus Prime was only a scouting force. Intelligence data suggested much larger swarms were moving through unexplored regions of space, heading toward populated systems. Administrator, Wu Jin reported to Hyunwoo, the threat is far from over. We're seeing movement patterns that suggest multiple swarm groups are converging on the galactic core. The Nexus attack was just a probe to test our defenses. Hyunwoo felt cold despite the warm air of the refugee center. How many worlds could be threatened? Hundreds, maybe thousands. And now we know that traditional galactic defenses are completely inadequate against Vorthak forces. This realization was spreading throughout the intelligence networks of multiple species. The comfortable assumption that the galaxy was essentially safe had been shattered by the appearance of an enemy that could only be stopped through methods that civilized beings found distasteful. Captain Jiho was reviewing casualty reports when Ambassador Inho requested a private meeting. The human had lost nearly a third of his fleet saving the Catharans, and now he was being asked to explain his actions to people who had contributed nothing to the rescue effort. Captain, Inho began carefully, the Galactic Council is prepared to offer compensation for your assistance, trade agreements, technology exchanges, perhaps colonial rights in uninhabited systems. Jiho looked up from his reports with an expression that Inho couldn't interpret. Ambassador, we didn't save your people for profit. We saved them because it was the right thing to do. But surely your government expects some form of return on their investment? The return is that 3 million innocent people are alive instead of dead. That's enough. This attitude was incomprehensible to most galactic leaders, who had built their civilizations on careful calculations of cost and benefit. The idea that an entire species would risk military assets for purely moral reasons challenged their fundamental assumptions about intelligent behavior. The news from Earth was equally disturbing to galactic observers. Instead of celebrating their military victory or demanding rewards for their sacrifice, human leaders were simply preparing for the next crisis. They had identified the Vorthak as an ongoing threat and were already modifying their fleet tactics to deal with larger swarms. They're not treating this as a special event, reported Zelthon intelligence analyst Mortek to his superiors. They're treating it as routine military operations. This suggests they consider such sacrifices to be normal behavior. The Zelthon leadership found this information deeply unsettling. If humans casually risked their lives for strangers, what might they do for people they actually cared about? The implications for galactic power structures were profound. As refugee ships arrived at various safe havens throughout Catharan space, the survivors began telling their stories. Tales of human soldiers sharing their food with alien children, of human medics treating anyone who needed help regardless of species, of human pilots dying to protect evacuation transports. These stories spread through galactic communication networks, reaching species that had never interacted with humans directly. The image of deathworlders as mindless savages was being replaced by something far more complex and troubling: the image of people who would die for their principles. The galaxy was beginning to understand that they had made a terrible mistake in excluding humanity from their civilization. But admitting that mistake would require confronting uncomfortable truths about their own limitations and the nature of true courage. The final Vorthak assault came like a biological tsunami. Thousands of bioships crashed through the human defensive lines, their living hulls absorbing damage that would have destroyed metal vessels. Acid sprayed across space as dying creatures released their internal toxins, creating clouds of death that turned the battlefield into a toxic nightmare. Marine Colonel Kyung-soo led his ground forces through the chaos as Vorthak landing pods broke through the atmosphere and slammed into Nexus Prime surface. The creatures inside were pure predators, walking nightmares with claws, teeth, and acidic blood designed to consume everything they touched. Alpha Team, take the eastern evacuation route, Kyung-soo ordered into his communicator. These civilians need to reach the transport ships alive. But the human approach to civilian protection horrified the watching Catharans. Where they expected careful negotiations and non-violent solutions, the Marines used overwhelming force to eliminate threats before they could harm innocents. Explosions rocked the colony as human soldiers destroyed entire buildings to stop Vorthak creatures from spreading. Engineer Somin watched in shock as a human squad used flamethrowers to clear a path through Vorthak spawn, the creatures writhing and dissolving in the intense heat. "They're burning everything," she said to Security Chief Wu Jin. "The colony infrastructure, the cultural sites, everything we built. But they're saving the people," Wu Jin replied, watching as terrified Catharan families ran through the cleared paths toward waiting transport ships. "They're destroying the colony to preserve the colonists." This was the fundamental difference between human and galactic thinking. Where civilized species valued property and cultural artifacts, humans valued life above all else. They would burn a city to save its people without hesitation. Lieutenant Jae-won commanded the TNS Defiant as his ship took position between a massive Vorthak bioship and a transport vessel full of Catharan refugees. His ship was badly damaged, systems failing throughout the hull, but the transport needed time to escape. "All hands prepare for ramming speed," Jae-won announced to his crew. "We're going to buy those civilians some time." The Defiant accelerated directly toward the bioship, every weapon firing as the distance closed. The Catharan transport was able to jump to safety just as Jae-won's ship exploded against the creature's hull, taking both vessels out of the battle. On Nexus Prime, Administrator Hyun-woo watched the sacrifice through the colony's sensors. He died for us, for people he'd never met. Human diplomat Nari was working frantically in the evacuation center, coordinating between panicked Catharans and the human Marines trying to protect them. The language barriers made everything more difficult, but she had learned to communicate through actions rather than words. "The children go first," Nari explained to a group of Catharan parents who didn't understand why their families were being separated. "Human ships, big protection. Children safe first, then adults." The Catharans were struggling with the concept. Their society kept families together during crises, but human military doctrine prioritized the most vulnerable. It seemed cruel to separate parents from children, but the results were undeniable. The survival rate was much higher. Chief Engineer Sung-min was performing miracles in the engine rooms of human ships throughout the fleet. Battle damage that should have disabled vessels was being repaired with improvised solutions that defied engineering logic. Where Catharan technology was precise and elegant, human engineering was adaptable and resilient. Captain Ji-ho, Sung-min, reported from deep in the ship's machinery spaces. "Main power is at 60%, but I've rerouted backup systems through the waste recycling network. We can maintain weapons power for another 2 hours." This adaptability was born from Earth's harsh environment. Human technology had to work when things went wrong, because on a death world, perfect conditions never lasted long. Every system had backups, and every backup had alternatives. The battle in space was reaching its climax. The human fleet had been reduced to half strength, but the Vorthak swarm was dying faster than it could adapt. Bodies of bioships drifted through space like fallen islands, their organic matter slowly dissolving in the vacuum. Tactical Officer Haya Jin coordinated the final assault from her battle-damaged console. Half her displays were dark, but she had learned to work with incomplete information. All remaining ships converge on the primary nest ship, If we can destroy their breeding center, the remaining creatures will lose coordination. The nest ship was a creature the size of a small moon, its surface covered with spawning pods that had been launching attack waves throughout the battle. Destroying it would require getting close enough to plant nuclear charges in its neural centers, a mission that would likely be suicide. "I'll take it," volunteered Captain Young-Soo, his fighter squadron reduced to just 5 pilots. "We're small enough to get through their defenses." "Negative," replied Fleet Commander Tae-Yang. "I need every fighter for evacuation escort. The Indomitable will handle the nest ship." Captain Ji-ho understood what his commander was planning. The flagship would have to ram the nest ship directly, sacrificing itself and its crew to destroy the Vorthak breeding center. It was the only way to ensure the creatures couldn't regenerate their forces. On the planet, the last transports were lifting off with loads of Catheran refugees. The evacuation had saved nearly 2 million people, far more than anyone thought possible. But the price had been devastating. The colony was in ruins and many human ships would never return to Earth. Medic Shung-ho was treating wounded from both species in the transport ships. Human soldiers with terrible injuries sat quietly while he worked on terrified Catheran children who didn't understand why these violent aliens were helping them. "Why?" asked a young Catheran girl whose family had been saved by a Marine squad. "Why do the scary people help us?" Shung-ho smiled gently as he bandaged her injured arm. "Because scary people know what real monsters look like, and you're not monsters." The human fleet's final sacrifice began as the remaining ships formed up for their last attack. They had lost more than half their vessels, but the mission was nearly complete. The Vorthak would be stopped here, and 3 million innocent lives would be saved. But the cost was becoming clear to the Catherans watching from their rescue ships. These humans, these barbaric Deathworlders, were willingly dying for people who had rejected them. They asked for nothing in return except the chance to do what they believed was right. Fleet Commander Tae-Yang's final message was broadcast to the entire evacuation fleet as his ship approached the nest ship. "This is the TDF 3rd Fleet. Mission accomplished. The civilians are safe." The Indomitable disappeared in a flash of nuclear fire that lit up the entire system. When the light faded, the nest ship was gone, and the remaining Vorthak creatures began dying as their coordination network collapsed. In the aftermath, as the rescue fleet jumped to safety, the Catherans found themselves facing an uncomfortable truth. Their savage rescuers had demonstrated courage, sacrifice, and compassion on a scale that their civilized society could barely comprehend. Engineer So-min looked back at the ruined world of Nexus Prime as their transport entered hyperspace. "They saved us," she said quietly. "The monsters we feared saved us from the real monsters." Security Chief Wu Jin nodded grimly. "And now we owe them everything." The galaxy was about to learn that sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected sources, and sometimes the people you fear the most are the ones willing to die for you. The first Vorthak bioships entered weapon range like a living wall of death. Each creature was the size of a small moon, its hull pulsing with organic rhythms as millions of smaller parasites prepared to launch toward Nexus Prime. The swarm moved with perfect coordination, driven by a hunger that had consumed countless worlds across the galaxy. Fleet Commander Tae-Yang watched the enemy approach from the bridge of his flagship. The Catherans had provided detailed sensor data about the Vorthak, but seeing them in person was different. These weren't ships in the traditional sense. They were living nightmares that turned entire planets into feeding grounds. "All ships, battle stations," Tae-Yang announced across the fleet communications. "Remember, we're not just fighting for ourselves today. 3 million civilians are depending on us." The human battle formation looked chaotic to the watching Catherans. But there was deadly purpose in every movement. Ships that had been arranged in neat defensive lines suddenly scattered into seemingly random positions, creating overlapping fields of fire that would funnel the enemy into killing zones. Young-Soo checked his fighters' weapon systems as he led his squadron away from the main fleet. His small craft looked fragile compared to the massive bioships approaching, but he had trained for this exact scenario. Human fighters were designed to be fast, maneuverable, and utterly lethal in close combat. "Phoenix Squadron, this is Lead," Young-Soo announced to his pilots. Today we show these monsters why humans don't back down. Stay tight and watch each other's backs. On Nexus Prime, engineer So-Min stared at the tactical display in amazement. The human formation made no sense. According to standard military doctrine, they were spreading their forces too thin, creating gaps that the enemy could exploit. "What are they doing?" she asked Security Chief Wu Jin. "Their formation is full of weaknesses." Wu Jin studied the display more carefully. Unless, those aren't weaknesses. Look at the spacing between their ships. They're creating channels that will force the Vorthak to approach from specific directions. Administrator Hyun Woo realized what the humans were planning. They're not trying to create a solid defensive line. They're building a trap. The first wave of Vorthak reached the outer edge of the human formation and immediately encountered something they had never faced before. Instead of retreating or trying to maintain safe distances, the human ships accelerated directly toward the bioships, closing to point-blank range where their weapons would be most effective. Tactical Officer Hai-Jin coordinated the opening attack from her position aboard the command ship. Her console showed hundreds of targets as the Vorthak swarm spread across space like a living disease. But instead of being overwhelmed by the numbers, she began identifying patterns in their movement. "All ships target priority Alpha," Hai-Jin announced. "Focus fire on the larger bioships first, they're directing the smaller ones." The human fleet opened fire with a violence that shocked the watching Catharans. Their weapons weren't the elegant energy beams favored by civilized species. Instead, they used kinetic projectiles, plasma bursts and missile salvos designed to cause maximum destruction in minimum time. The first Vorthak bioship to die screamed across every frequency as human weapons tore through its living hull. The creature's death throes sent biological signals to the rest of the swarm, warning them that this prey fought back with unexpected ferocity. Young-Soo led his fighter squadron into the chaos, weaving between bioships the size of cities while unleashing precise strikes against vulnerable points. His small craft danced through defensive fire that would have destroyed larger vessels, each pilot trusting their training and instincts. "Target the feeding tentacles," Young-Soo ordered his squadron. "Without those, they can't consume planetary matter." The fighters swarmed around a massive bioship, their weapons carving through organic armor that had evolved to resist natural forces. But human weapons weren't natural. They were designed by a species that had turned warfare into an art form. On the planet below, Dr. Minho was analyzing the battle data streaming down from the fleet. His medical training gave him insights into the Vorthak biology that pure military minds might miss. "Captain Jiho," Minho reported over the communications link. "I'm seeing biological stress patterns in the enemy. They're not used to sustained resistance. The larger specimens are showing signs of panic." Jiho relayed this information to the fleet commanders. "All ships maintain pressure. The enemy is adapting slower than expected." But the Vorthak were learning. The second wave approached more cautiously, using the smaller bioships as shields, while the larger ones prepared more devastating attacks. Streams of acid and clouds of parasitic organisms began filling space around the human fleet. This was where human experience with hostile environments proved crucial. Earth's children had evolved on a world where everything tried to kill them. From the weather to the wildlife, a few biological weapons were nothing compared to surviving childhood on a death world. Hai-Jin watched the enemy adaptation and immediately began developing counter-strategies. Fleet Command, recommend formation shift to Delta pattern. Route the parasitic clouds through our point defense grid. The human fleet flowed into new positions with practiced ease. What looked like chaos to the Catharans was actually a complex dance that human military doctrine had perfected through centuries of conflict. Each ship knew exactly where to be and when to be there. Medic Shung Ho was treating wounded crew members when the first casualties were brought to his medical bay. Burns from biological acids, puncture wounds from organic projectiles, and the unique injuries that came from fighting living weapons. But he also noticed something else. "Captain," Shung Ho reported to Jiho, "our casualty rates are much lower than projected. The enemy weapons are designed to fight ships with energy shields and standard armor. Our composite hulls are confusing their targeting systems." This was another advantage that the galaxy had never considered. Human technology had developed differently, because Earth was isolated from galactic civilization. Where other species had refined elegant solutions, humans had built robust, adaptable systems that could function in any environment. The battle raged for hours, with neither side able to gain a decisive advantage. The Vorthak had numbers, but the humans had experience fighting impossible odds. Every human ship was outnumbered 20-1, but they had trained for exactly this scenario. Marine Colonel Kyung-soo prepared his boarding teams as damaged Vorthak bioships drifted close to the human fleet. "Remember, these are living creatures," he told his soldiers. "Find the neural centers and shut them down. Don't give them time to regenerate." The boarding actions were brutal and brief. Human Marines fought through organic corridors filled with defensive organisms, using weapons and tactics that would have horrified civilized species. But they were effective, turning the Vorthak's own bioships against the swarm. On Nexus Prime, the Catharans watched in stunned silence as the battle continued. They had expected the humans to be defeated quickly, overwhelmed by superior numbers. Instead, the Deathworlders were holding their own against an enemy that had destroyed entire star systems. "How are they doing this?" Somin asked. The Vorthak consumed the Zentari homeworld in days. They destroyed the Corvani defense fleet without losing a single bioship. Wu Jin was studying the tactical patterns more carefully. "Look at their movement. Every action serves multiple purposes. When they destroy one bioship, the wreckage damages two others. When they retreat, they draw enemies into crossfire zones." Hyun Woo realized something profound was happening above their world. The humans weren't just fighting. They were demonstrating a completely different approach to warfare. Where other species tried to minimize conflict, humans had embraced it and turned it into a precise science. "They don't fight like civilized beings," Hyunwoo said quietly. "They fight like survivors," Woojin finished. "They fight like people who have spent their entire evolution learning to kill things that are bigger, stronger, and more dangerous than they are." As the battle entered its crucial phase, the Vorthak began launching their final assault. Every remaining bioship accelerated toward the planet, accepting massive casualties to overwhelm the human defenses. This was the moment when most defensive actions failed, when sheer numbers finally overcame skill and courage. But the humans had one more surprise waiting. As the Vorthak swarm approached the planet's atmosphere, the seemingly chaotic human formation suddenly revealed its true purpose. Every ship was exactly where it needed to be to create overlapping kill zones that would funnel the enemy into predetermined target areas. "All ships," Commander Taeyang announced, "execute final protocol. Show them what happens when you threaten human allies." The battle was about to reach its climax, and the galaxy would never be the same. Space around Nexus Prime rippled like water as massive shapes dropped out of hyperspace. The first ships to arrive were sleek and angular, bristling with weapon systems that looked nothing like the elegant designs of civilized species. Where Catharan ships were smooth curves and artistic beauty, these vessels were sharp edges and brutal functionality. Captain Ji-ho stood on the bridge of the TNS Indomitable, watching the tactical display as his fleet took position around the threatened world. 200 human warships arranged themselves in attack formations that had been perfected through centuries of warfare on Earth. Each captain knew their role without needing detailed instructions. "Captain," called his communications officer, "we're receiving signals from the planet. The aliens seem confused about our arrival." Ji-ho nodded. He had read the intelligence reports about the Catharans, peaceful traders who thought violence could always be avoided through talking. They had specifically voted to keep humanity out of galactic politics because humans solved problems with weapons instead of words. "Open a channel," Ji-ho ordered. "Let's try to explain why we're here." Down on Nexus Prime, Engineer Somin was staring at the tactical display in the colony's command center. The readings made no sense. The ships had appeared exactly where she expected the Zelton rescue fleet to arrive, but these vessels looked nothing like their traditional allies. "Are you certain these are human ships?" Somin asked the technician monitoring the sensors. "Positive identification, ma'am. The energy signatures match known Terran patterns. The ship designs are consistent with intelligence reports about their military forces. Security Chief Wu Jin walked over to join them. I don't understand. Why would the humans respond to our distress call? They hate us. We voted to exclude them from galactic society. Maybe they didn't get the message about being excluded, So-Min said, but she didn't believe it herself. The humans knew exactly how the galaxy felt about them. Everyone knew that Earth was considered too dangerous for normal diplomatic relations. Administrator Hyunwoo entered the command center looking exhausted. He had spent the last few hours organizing evacuation procedures while the Vorthak swarm grew larger in their sensors. The bioships were still hours away, but their numbers were overwhelming. Millions of creatures designed to consume entire worlds. Status report, Hyunwoo said. The human fleet is in position around our world, So-Min reported. They're trying to establish communications. Their language is difficult to translate. Put them through, Hyunwoo ordered. The main screen flickered and showed the interior of an alien warship. The human captain looked exactly like the intelligence photos. Bipedal, mammalian, with forward-facing predator eyes. But there was something in his expression that the reports had not captured. Determination mixed with what almost looked like kindness. This is Captain Jiho of the Terran Defense Force, the human said in badly translated Catharan. We received your distress signal. Our fleet is here to help. Woojin stepped forward. Captain, Jiho, we are grateful for your response, but we must ask why your people chose to help us. Our governments have not been friendly. Jiho was quiet for a moment, clearly struggling with the language translator. Your governments fear us, he said finally. But people are in danger. That is more important than politics. So-Min found herself surprised by the simple honesty of the statement. She had expected threats or demands for payment. Instead, the humans seemed genuinely concerned about their welfare. Captain, you should know that the approaching enemy is extremely dangerous, So-Min said. The Vorthak are not a normal military force. They consume all biological matter. They cannot be reasoned with or negotiated with. They exist only to feed and reproduce. We understand, Jiho replied. We have studied the intelligence reports. The Vorthak are what we would call an extinction-level threat. They must be stopped completely or they will consume everything. On his ship, Jiho turned to Dr. Minho, the fleet's specialist in alien biology. The scientist had spent years studying reports about various hostile species, preparing for the day when humanity might face them. Doctor, what do we know about Vorthak weaknesses? Minho checked his datapad. They are highly adaptive but depend on biological processes. Extreme heat, cold, or radiation can slow them down. Their bioships are living creatures, so they feel pain and can be killed like any animal. Linguist Ari looked up from her translation console. Captain, I'm making progress with their language. The grammatical structure is similar to ancient Terran languages. I should be able to improve communication within a few hours. Good work, Jiho said. We need them to trust us if we're going to coordinate an effective defense. Back on the planet, the Catharan leadership was struggling with an impossible situation. Their peaceful society had no experience with military coordination. They had protocols for natural disasters and trade disputes, but nothing that prepared them for alien invasion. How do we work with them? Woojin asked. Everything about their behavior suggests violence is their first solution to any problem. Look at their ships. They're designed for war, not exploration or trade. Hyunwoo studied the human fleet formation on their tactical display. The ships moved with precision and purpose, maintaining defensive positions that protected both the planet and their own forces. Perhaps, he said slowly, being designed for war is exactly what we need right now. So-Min was monitoring the approaching Vorthak swarm. The bioships were accelerating as they entered the system, their hunger driving them toward the planet's rich biosphere. The enemy will be within weapon range in 6 hours, she reported. Their numbers are overwhelming. The display showed thousands of organic vessels, each one pulsing with life and filled with creatures that existed only to consume. The largest bioships were the size of cities, capable of landing on planets and devouring entire continents. Captain Jiho, Hyunwoo said over the communication link. Our sensors show the enemy approaching in massive numbers. Do your forces have enough firepower to stop them? Jiho looked at his tactical officer, who quickly ran calculations on the approaching swarm. Administrator, we are outnumbered approximately 10-1. In a standard engagement, those odds would be considered impossible. Wu Jin felt his hope collapse. Then we cannot win. I didn't say that, Jiho replied. I said the odds would be impossible in a standard engagement, but humans don't fight standard engagements. Fleet Commander Taeyang's voice came over the Fleet Communications channel. All ships, this is Fleet Command. We are facing a standard swarm-type enemy with overwhelming numerical superiority. Standard doctrine applies. We make them pay for every meter of space. Throughout the human fleet, crews prepared for battle with the efficiency born from generations of warfare. Weapons were charged, fighters were launched, and battle plans were distributed to every ship. Unlike the Catharans, the humans had planned for this exact type of scenario. On the planet, So-Min watched the human preparations with growing amazement. Their coordination was perfect, their movements precise. Each ship knew exactly what to do without requiring constant communication. It was like watching a single organism with 200 bodies. How do they coordinate so efficiently? She asked. Military training, Wu Jin answered grimly. Every human is taught to fight from childhood. Their entire civilization is built around warfare. But as they watched, something else became apparent. The humans were positioning their ships to create a defensive shield around Nexus Prime. They were placing themselves between the planet and the approaching swarm, accepting the most dangerous positions for themselves. Hyunwoo realized something that the intelligence reports had never mentioned. Yes, the humans were warriors. Yes, they solved problems with violence when necessary. But they were willing to die to protect people who had rejected them, people who considered them barbarians. Captain Jiho, Hyunwoo said, why are your people willing to sacrifice themselves for us? We voted to exclude humanity from galactic civilization. We called you dangerous primitives. Jiho's image on the screen was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his words were simple but carried deep conviction. Because it's the right thing to do. In space, the first Vorthak scouts appeared on the edge of sensor range. The real battle was about to begin, and the galaxy was about to learn what happens when Deathworlders decide to protect someone. The creatures expected easy prey. Instead, they were about to discover why Earth's children had survived on the most dangerous planet in known space. The morning sky over Nexus Prime burned orange as Hyunwoo stepped onto the observation deck of the colony's central tower. Below him, the peaceful Catharan settlement spread across the green valley like a collection of white pearls. Children played in the gardens while their parents tended to the crystal farms that made this world so valuable. Everything looked normal, but Hyunwoo knew better. 3 days ago, their deep space sensors had picked up something terrible. A massive swarm was heading straight for their world. The readings showed millions of bioships moving together like a dark cloud across the stars. The computer systems identified them as Vorthak, the ancient enemy that consumed entire worlds. Administrator, called Yoonji from behind him. The young communications officer looked worried as she approached. I've sent distress signals to all our allies. The Zelthons should respond within 2 days. The Cortani promised to send their peacekeeping fleet. Hyunwoo nodded but didn't feel relieved. The Vorthak moved fast, too fast. Even their closest allies might not arrive in time. Keep sending the signals, he said. Use all frequencies. Someone has to help us. Down in the colony streets, people were starting to notice the increased activity. Government vehicles moved between buildings, and emergency teams ran drills more often than usual. But Hyunwoo had not told them the truth yet. How could he explain that death was coming from the stars? The Catharan people had lived in peace for over 1,000 years. They traded with dozens of species and built beautiful cities on dozens of worlds. War was something they read about in history books, not something that happened to civilized beings. The galaxy had systems to prevent such things. There were protocols and agreements. Help always came when it was needed. Sir, Yoonji said, checking her communication device. I'm receiving automated responses. The Zelthon fleet is dealing with a crisis in the Outer Rim. The Cortani are in their meditation season and cannot break their spiritual commitments. The Nexari say they will consider our request after their council meets next week. Hyunwoo felt cold despite the warm morning air. What about the others? The trade partners? The cultural exchange programs? Similar responses, sir. Everyone has reasons why they cannot help immediately. Yunji looked down at her feet. The earliest response time I'm seeing is 8 days. The Vorthak will be here in 4. The administrator closed his eyes and tried to think. 4 days was not enough time to evacuate 3 million colonists. They had cargo ships and passenger shuttles, but nothing that could move people quickly. Enough. The colony had never been built with the idea that everyone might need to leave at once. Sir, came another voice. Security Chief Wu Jin walked up to join them. The older man looked grim. Our defensive systems are completely inadequate. We have police equipment and riot control tools. Nothing that could stop a military invasion. The Vorthak eat entire ecosystems. What chance do we have? Hyunwoo looked out at the peaceful colony again. In the distance, he could see the spaceport where families were arriving for the morning shuttles to other colonies. Children laughed as they ran between the landing pads. Parents talked about business deals and vacation plans. None of them knew that their world was about to die. We need to start evacuation procedures, Hyunwoo said finally. Quietly at first, essential personnel and children get priority. We can't cause panic, but we need to start moving people. Wu Jin shook his head. With our current transport capacity, we can evacuate maybe 200,000 people in 4 days. What about the rest? The number hit Hyunwoo like a physical blow. Nearly 3 million people would be left behind when the Vorthak arrived. The creatures would consume every living thing on the planet, from the smallest bacteria to the largest trees. The colony would become another dead world in the Vorthak's wake. Yunji was working frantically with her communication equipment. I'm trying emergency frequencies now, she said. Maybe someone monitoring deep space will hear us. The old military bands that nobody uses anymore. Military bands? Hyunwoo asked. Who uses those? Nobody civilized, Wu Jin answered. The old warrior species before they evolved beyond violence, some primitives who haven't learned better ways to solve problems. He paused. But at this point, does it matter who helps us? Yunji's equipment crackled with static as she adjusted the frequencies. I'm broadcasting on everything now. All bands, all languages, all codes. Someone has to be listening. Far across the galaxy, on a small blue world orbiting a yellow star, Admiral Dong Hyun sat in the command center of the Terran Defense Force. Earth's military monitored thousands of frequencies, watching for threats that might come from the darkness between stars. They had learned long ago that the universe was not a safe place. The distress signal came through clearly on the old emergency bands. The automated translation systems worked quickly, turning alien words into human language. A peaceful colony under attack. 3 million civilians in danger. No military forces to defend them. Sir, said his communications officer, we're receiving an alien distress call. Species identification shows Catharan origin. They're facing something called a Vorthak invasion. Dong Hyun frowned. He knew the Catharans from intelligence reports. Peaceful traders who considered humans to be violent primitives. They had specifically requested that Earth be excluded from galactic politics because humans were too dangerous for civilized society. Any other responses to their signal? Dong Hyun asked. Negative, sir. It appears they're broadcasting on restricted military frequencies out of desperation. No civilized species monitors these channels anymore. The Admiral stood and walked to the star map displayed on the main screen. Nexus Prime was 2 days away at maximum jump speed. The Terran fleet had been conducting training exercises in nearby space. They could reach the colony before any other force in the galaxy. But these were the same aliens who had voted to quarantine humanity. They called humans deathworlders and barbaric warmongers. They wanted nothing to do with Earth or its people, sir, his officer asked. Should we respond? Dong Hyun looked at the tactical display showing their available forces. The TDF 3rd Fleet was in perfect position to help. 200 ships with the best weapons and the finest crews in human space. They could save 3 million lives. But those lives belonged to people who hated everything humanity stood for. The Admiral thought about his own children, safe in schools on Earth. He thought about human colonies scattered across space, always ready to defend each other despite vast distances. He thought about what it meant to be human in a galaxy that feared them. "Prepare the fleet for immediate departure," Dong-hyun said finally. "All ships, combat ready. We leave in 1 hour." "Sir, are you certain?" The Catharans specifically requested that humans be excluded from— "I don't care what they requested," Dong-hyun said. "People are dying. That's all that matters." Back on Nexus Prime, Yoonji was monitoring her equipment when something impossible happened. A response came through on the military frequencies. The computer struggled to translate the alien language, but the meaning was clear. Help was coming. "Sir," she called to Hyunwoo, "I'm getting a response. Someone heard us." "The Zelthons?" Hyunwoo asked hopefully. Yoonji checked the signal origin and her face went white. "No, sir. The response is coming from the Sol system." "Sol system?" Woojin asked. "That's the quarantine zone. The Deathworlder system." Hyunwoo felt his hope turn to fear. The humans were coming. The violent, unpredictable species that the galaxy had agreed to avoid was responding to their call for help. In space above Nexus Prime, dark shapes began to appear as the Vorthak swarm arrived ahead. Of schedule, their salvation might be worse than their doom.